Well, that is a happy winner of today's game. He gets the rest day tomorrow, so he will probably need that going into round five. We had two decisive games here in round four of Wijk. But without further ado, this is your rapid recap. And Fiona, no surprise here that our game of the day is between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, and his second, the defending Tata Steel champion, Jorden van Foreest.
And what a game it was. Magnus said yesterday he was curious to see what Jorden had up his sleeve. But it was Magnus himself who dictated the tempo in the opening, deciding he didn't want any big theoretical debates.
I feel like we were lied to because when this game started, we're looking at this position symmetrical. It was going to be boring, right, Fiona?
Absolutely. It started off quietly, and we weren't too sure what we were in for. Jorden did a great job of keeping things under control with the black pieces, but very soon things started coming to life here.
And I think this was the first moment. Bishop to f1, the rook cleared out of the way, and the point is the bishop on e4. There's a wall of pawns on light squares, which restricts the mobility of black's bishop. So if he didn't take on f3, let's say he made some random move like king h8, in comes knight d2, then comes pawn to f3. This bishop is going to get trapped as it only has a couple squares. So that bishop on the light squares needed to capture on f3. Jorden did just that. And then Fiona, the knight jumped into the middle of the board.
Yes, absolutely. That knight cannot or shouldn't be captured, because then the bishop from the g7 comes to life, captures on c3. So instead, Magnus, he just dropped his bishop back and the knight jumped into e4. Magnus tried to attack the knight with bishop to d3, and now Jorden with an interesting decision, f5.
We really liked the decision during the game. He is solidifying the e4 square, and then he tried to take it firmly under his control. But there was a bit of an issue, or so we thought, when after g5 and g4, bishop takes e4. You don't really want to lose the pawn you just placed here, but if you take on e4 with the d pawn, black's position is in shambles. After d5, you see first the rook on d1, then after some captures in the d5 square. If we trade and take a free pawn, it's not so free after all, because here comes a rook to c5. We're hitting the d5 pawn. Behind it is a weak f5 pawn. All of white's pieces have come to life, and black's position is really terrible.
So it turns out the whole idea of Jorden, of course, he had seen this coming. His idea was to give up the pawn by capturing with the f-pawn and leaving the pawn on g4 undefended. Magnus took it. At first, we weren't sure what was going on here.
No, we weren't, because a pawn is a pawn, except there is clear compensation down the f file. The rook on f8, the pawn on e4, they team up quite nicely. And after the next few moves, we saw that Jorden had a plan to just strike on the king side. So Fiona, it seemed like Magnus needed to find something for himself on the queen side, but it was feeling like it might be a little bit too slow, and his king was the one in danger.
Yes, and Jorden, well, it wasn't enough for him to give up just one pawn. So here Magnus trying to get some play on the queen side. And Jorden, he decides, well, after g4, Magnus is threatening to consolidate by playing h3 himself. So Jorden says, no, 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 Magnus, no h3 for you. Take my own pawn there.
That's right. Without pawns, there are open files, and that's what black needed in this game, was trying first the f file, but why not the h file as well? So queen takes h3, the rook came to f8, and then we saw this moment here with rook g6, g5, rook f5, very clearly going after this pawn, h4 defends, and this is where things got really out of control. Bishop f8, the rook came back, bishop e7, Fiona, we saw the clear point of this. Bishop takes g5 was the big threat.
Indeed, but after Magnus's next move, rook b2, now the question is, you want to take on g5, and Jorden did, but he took with the bishop. Robert, why was that maybe not ideal?
You tend to want to take with the less valuable piece. So bishop takes g5 makes sense from that principle. But unfortunately, after bishop takes g5, your bishop is pinned. And king f1 was a great move by Magnus. But before we look at the game continuation, what should have been played was rook takes g5, pawn takes on g5. And after this rook takes g5, we see that it's going to be a queen for black, two rooks for white. It's kind of reminiscent of Jan Nepomniachtchi, Magnus Carlsen game 6. But in fact, here the position, according to the eval bar, is zeros. It's because the white king will be exposed. So while the rooks will try to attack, unfortunately, the king is too exposed.
Yes, so this would most likely have led to a draw. But Jorden, maybe after playing such brilliant moves, giving up 2 pawns, maybe the first misstep, capturing with the bishop on g5, and Magnus finding the reason why bishop g5 wasn't the best, because king f1 just steps out of the g file, and suddenly we look down at Jordan's rook on g6, which is unprotected.
That's right, because the bishop can't move, the rook is loose, and even the evaluation wasn't sure. The players certainly were not. They had no idea. They were just trying to calculate as best they could without much time. You see on the left-hand side of the screen here, 10 plus minutes for white, 7 and change for black. That's not a lot of time. And we saw queen a7, which actually was a big mistake because of king to e2. It was not seen by the players. It's much easier to see a move like this with the help of an engine. The point is, after queen a6 check, king comes to d1, and after queen d3 check, you are out of checks. The rook comes to d2. The king is nice and snug on d1. I will win your bishop. Thank you very much. So that was a missed chance by Magnus Carlsen. And then instead of that, king to e2, he didn't want to walk away. He said queen g4. And after queen a6 check, Fiona, we were wondering what white could do here, and chat helped us out, didn't they?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this was such a critical moment as well, because it was move 40, so the last move before the time control. And we saw Magnus Carlsen go down to his last seconds before giving the check on b8.
Yeah, he went here just to show everybody queen takes f5 is a losing move. You win a rook, but you lose the game. You do not want any part of that. The reason, the king on g1, bishop f4 is check. Where can the king go? It certainly can't go to f1. Thank you. The queen covers that square, leaves only h1, and then the queen will go to f1 itself. That is check and mate. So in this position, the queen couldn't take on f5, but chat told us rook takes c6 was in the air. And the point is, after queen takes c6, queen takes f5 is now available. There's no f1 control. That means if this bishop were to move and go to f4, the same as we were looking at just a moment ago, the king slides over to h1. There is no checkmate. The game remains complicated, but that would have allowed Magnus to scoop off the rook. But Fiona, instead, we saw a different approach.
Yeah, good to see. Magnus is only human. King e2 earlier would have been the first moment, rook c2, but he is human. But rook b8 seemed to also just be enough. We weren't too sure at first. Is Jorden suddenly gonna get some chances? He instantly played bishop d8, which uncovers the skewer along the g file. But once again, although Magnus said he doesn't believe in fortresses, that is what was about to happen here.
It was just one careful move by Jorden, because king h7, trying to play for a win. I want to keep more material on the board. Your king is worse than mine. I have a queen. Unfortunately, this move loses because of the beautiful deflection, rook to d7. You can't take my queen because your rook is pinned. If you take what looks like a free rook, queen takes f5 comes in with check. Down goes your rook on d7. White wins the game. So that was not played. Instead, rook f8 in this moment here. But the trade, the queen gives itself up for the rook, but I like throwing in the check first. And then after a3, this was a fortress that Jorden could not break.
Indeed, a few more moves were played with Jorden trying to get his king closer to the enemy king, but finally, this final pawn sacrifice with c5 to open the 6th rank and activate the black queen led to this perpetual check here along the 6th rank. Robert, what a stunning fighting draw between Magnus Carlsen and his second, Jorden van Foreest.
Yeah, they're friends. Today they were foes, but they still had a friendly split of the point, even if the game was extremely combative, both players having chances. But alas, the game was a draw, and this was your round 4 rapid recap. Whew, Fiona, what a day it was here in Wijk aan Zee. 4 rounds are in the books, and we have the results on screen. 2 decisive games. We just showed you a game that was not decisive, but that was such a barn burner.
Absolutely. And the other game of the day, I think it was a close toss-up between the two. If you haven't seen Shahriar Mamediarov's win over Jan Krzysztof Duda, that was a very exciting one as well, and quite a turnaround in that game. And well, Prague playing the longest game of the day to beat Niels Grandelius. And let's look at the standings, Robert, after 4 rounds.
We have Vidit Gujrathi. His many fans will celebrate his lead, but we shouldn't be celebrating early no matter who you're a fan of. It's only 4 rounds done. There are 13 total rounds, 9 to go. And so Vidit Gujrathi, he is in the lead. Magnus Carlsen, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. I have to say, Mamedyarov has made some draws by agreement, some offers that I have been very vocal about. I love the way he plays the game. That's why I want to see more moves from him. And today, his draw offer declined by Jan Krzysztof Duda, and he goes on to win the game. He's joined by Rapport and Yesipenko and Van Foreest at the top.
Indeed, he is always a force to be reckoned with. And I'm very curious to see how the players deal with their rest day. I think we're going to look at the pairings for the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow is a rest day. We'll have Niels Grandelius, who's been struggling. It will be interesting to see what he can do with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. Another very interesting game, our leader Vidit Gujrathi, he will be playing black against his good friend Anish Giri. What are your expectations for that game?
Anish is going to come prepared. We know he had an early day today. He drew with the black piece against Surya Karyakin without much effort. It was just a standard opening draw, and he gets white. So he's going to want to take down Vidit. It's his friend, but when you play competitions, nobody is really your friend anymore. After the game is done, you can have a bite to eat, enjoy each other's company. But I think Anish is really going to go for it. And I said this earlier, Fiona, and you can disagree with me, but my game of the round, at least in advance, is Jorden van Foreest with the white pieces against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, 2 of the most creative players in the game.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to that. Also, another game between you, Phoenix Severo, and Yesipenko against Caruana. Plenty to look forward to. But first, we will have a rest day tomorrow. And then, Robert, you and I will be back 2 days from now on January the 20th at 2 p.m. Central European Time. That's 5 a.m. Pacific. We look forward to having you back, Robert. It's been quite the day. Thank you so much for being here by my side. Thank you to everyone in the chat who was watching us. And I hope you all enjoy your rest day. And we will see you 2 days from now. Robert, any final words?
Yeah, they don't get a rest yet. We get to go. We can do whatever we want. They're staying put because Title Tuesday is coming to this channel right here, right now. We're off. Fiona, it's been an absolute pleasure. Chat, you've been okay. No, in all seriousness, I appreciate your support, your viewership. It really means the world to us. But now you have to watch those speed chess players blitz it out. It is Title Tuesday. You don't want to miss it.